The name of the poem we chose was called America. The author's name was Claude McKay, and he was born on September 15th, 1889, and he passed away on May 22nd, 1948. And that's a picture of him.
I did the year and two historical events. Claude McKay wrote his poem in the early 1920s. There were two very important events that happened around that time. I think these events tie into the poem very well. The first one I did was the Great Depression. From reading the poem, I realized that Claude McKay refers to America as she. And during this time period, Claude McKay makes it very obvious that America was going through a harsh time. For example, he says, "Giving me the strength to erect against her hate. Her bigness sweeps my being like a flood." From this quote, you can really tell how corrupt America was at the time. I think this quote goes along with the Great Depression because from reading the quote like this, in the poem you can tell that America was really in shambles. The next historical event I did was another huge event that happened in this time period, and that was the 19th Amendment. This was giving the woman the right to vote, and it was a huge accomplishment for America and a turning point in the time period. In the poem, Claude states, "And see her might like granite wonders there, beneath the time's unerring hand, like priceless treasure sinking in the sand." From this quote in the poem, I made out that Claude believes America is going in the right direction. Women getting the right to vote is a huge and perfect example of that.
In this slide, we'll cover the literary devices in the poem. Throughout America, McKay uses many different types of literary devices, but I can't cover all of them, so I'll only cover the important ones. The ones I'll be touching on today are personification, iambic pentameter, alliteration, and assonance. McKay uses personification when he includes, "Although she feeds me bread of bitterness," comparing America to someone who is feeding McKay bitter bread. We also see McKay use personification when he includes, "Sinks into my throat her tiger's tooth." This statement is comparing America to someone who is sinking her teeth into McKay's throat. Both of these usages of personification are just pointing out America's mistreatment of her citizens, which is a common theme throughout this poem. Another literary device used is iambic pentameter. McKay structures this poem in the rhyme scheme of A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, E, F, G, G. Most famously, we see this rhyme scheme used in Shakespeare poems, but many other poets use this one too. McKay uses alliteration when he includes the phrases "touch of times" and "bread of bitterness," stressing the syllables T and B. The last literary device we'll cover is assonance. McKay used assonance to create rhythm in the text by stating, "I gaze into the days," and "like tides into my," and both of these phrases when he stresses the A and the I sound. The graphic I included is just a picture of the poem with some of the literary devices highlighted so you can see them for yourself. Thanks.
For the summary, the poem expresses the author's feelings about America. Claude McKay was the author, and he was a Jamaican-American writer during a time in America where African Americans were very strongly discriminated against. He was also a main figure in the Harlem Renaissance. McKay criticizes the violence and the racism that exists in America, but at the same time, he acknowledges the strength and the power that it possesses. At the end of the poem, he looks into the future where America has crumbled as a nation. For the line-by-line summary of the poem, in lines 1 through 4, the author focuses on the negative aspects of America. McKay compares the way that the nation makes him feel to the taste of bitter bread and the feeling of a tiger bite. In the next 4 lines, 5 through 8, McKay focuses more on the positive aspects of America. He says that its vigor gives him strength, and he compares America to a flood to express its size and power. In lines 9 through 12, McKay writes in first-person point of view, and it makes the poem more personal and shares his personal thoughts on America. He is saying that he understands that America is an amazing place, although it makes him feel angry and unpleasant at certain moments. And in the final two lines, McKay is suggesting that the power of time and nature will last for much longer than humans will, and that America will eventually crumble. And to quote the very last line of the poem, like priceless treasures sinking in the sand. And that's exactly how the poem ends.
Symbolism. Claude McKay uses a tiger to symbolize America in the opening of the poem. America is a tiger that is stealing the speaker's breath of life. A tiger is supposed to symbolize America's inhumane and violent characteristics, especially towards minorities. Like priceless treasures sinking in the sand, a quote mentioned at the very end of the poem. The author uses sand to symbolize time and treasures to symbolize America's achievements. The speaker predicts all of America's revolutionary achievements will soon deteriorate due to time.
Message of the poem. The message of the poem is that you can love and hate something at the same time. Claude McKay was originally born in Jamaica and moved to America when he was 23 years old in 1912. His poem expressed how he had very mixed feelings about the United States, which was his adopted country. He acknowledges the good parts, the strengths, and how he loves the country. He also criticizes the country's racism and violence. His love-hate relationship with America is shown in the poem when he says, "Her vigor flows like tides into my blood, gave me strength erect against her hate."
How the historical events impacted the poem/author. The first historical event I think impacts the poem or author is the Great Depression. The Great Depression affected the whole U.S. population, especially minorities. African American unemployment rates doubled, and the unskilled workforce was filled with whites. I think the Great Depression plays a role into the poem because at this time it was hard for African Americans to find a job, let alone keep a job, because they were the first to be laid off. This is a good representation that shows inequality, which is reflected in the poem. The second historical event to impact the poem or author is the 19th Amendment. The 19th Amendment, which is the woman's right to vote, was approved 2 years before the poem was published. Even though women technically had the right to vote now, there were still obstacles for them to overcome. During the year this poem was published, the National Woman's Party met with the president to guarantee the woman's right to vote. I think the fresh amendment played a part in this poem because the poem talks about how cruel America can be, especially to minorities, in this case, women.